Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode is kind of interesting in that it kind of reveals a little bit about the history of Crystal Cove, just a little bit about how. Well, not so much. Well, kind of not so much about how it was founded, but specifically how the sheriff's department in Crystal Cove was actually founded, and it kind of relates to the mystery of the story, and it is kind of interesting in that regard. And also, there's something very cute that happens at the end, and I'll get to that. But in case this episode opens up with the gang trying to actually catch a fiend trying to catch a monster called the Piranha Goat. We don't actually find out much about who the Piranha Goat is. Just what his motives are, and I will get to those because they are eventually revealed. But in case the episode kind of starts with them kind of wrapping up the mystery, where they're setting the trap to actually catch the Piranha Goat in, and what we find out is that the trap, true to form, is a very complicated and outlandish trap, as per Fred's entire thing. But with Daphne pointing out that it is indeed a very complicated trap. But all you need to know is that there's a pulley system, and that eventually a hot dog cart is supposed to set it off and actually cause the trap to actually go off and trap the Piranha Goat, which Fred points out that it's so complicated that it has to work, and right on cue, Piranha Goat, who we finally meet, actually winds up bursting out of the bank, with several tubes of what we later find out are blueprints, but he comes out with several tubes tucked under his arm, and it's at this point where Fred tries to spring his trap, which doesn't work because the pulley system gets stuck, and it's at this point where Piranha Goat starts chuckling to himself about how they'll never catch him, and before running off and almost immediately running face first into Sheriff Stone's squad car, who shows up and long story short, after trying to apprehend, I haven't even started the sentence, but after trying to arrest the Piranha Goat, he then once again tells Mr. Ink to stop doing his job for him and let the law officials to actually handle it. And Piranha Goat just merely remarks that he's been busted, but it's at this point where Fred's trap finally successfully works, and in the process, Sheriff Stone, as well as Mystery Inc. winds up getting scooped up in the net that Fred has set up, and Piranha Goat takes this opportunity to flee, but he's then cornered by a new character that we later find out is called Dead Justice. But long story short, Dead Justice immediately shows up and arrests Piranha Goat and wanders off, and with Sheriff Stone merely ominously remarking that Dead Justice has returned. And after getting free from the net, the Mystery Inc. then asks Sheriff Stone to actually clarify, while Shaggy and Scooby kind of remark that it's very good that he didn't get the blueprints because it turns out they were for the water supply, and that they wouldn't have had clean water. But they actually stop when they point out that when Scooby kind of points out that they didn't shower much anyway, which Shaggy immediately tries to cover up, and because Velma is within earshot of them. But in case it is at this point where the kids actually ask for Sheriff Stone to clarify who Dead Justice is, and what he explains is that Dead Justice is a very famous lawman, and one of Sheriff Stone's personal heroes behind himself and the mayor. So he's like his third favorite hero, but even though in the first one doesn't really count, so second, but. And when Fred remarks that he's never actually heard of Dead Justice, he then proceeds to point out that he's actually been dead at least a century, which Fred points out explains a lot. But then they wonder what exactly is going on, what exactly it is with Dead Justice, what exactly Dead Justice deal is, since he seems like he might be after with Sheriff Stone's job. But Sheriff Stone then remarks that is in fact impossible, because as we find out, he's won 27 Crime Buster of the Year awards in a row, So he's a pretty big deal in the town of Crystal Cove, and also while they're actually just talking about this, they note that there's a lot of the oyster shells on there, which they constantly step on throughout the scene, and wonder where all the oysters actually came from, since they just appeared in front of town hall. But in case with that, the episode then cuts to a montage of Sheriff Stone trying to catch several criminals. And Dead Justice just shows up and arrests them all before Sheriff Stone even can, which does wind up becoming a bit problematic later, as we find out, because Dead Justice is just arresting all of the criminals and doing Sheriff Stone's job. That winds up being a very big conflict of interest between the two of them. So, in case what we find out is that the crime awards have since gone on, and which Mayor Jones is actually hosting, and Sheriff Stone's deputy Bucky, who we have actually met in a previous episode, but this is his first major appearance this is his first major role in an episode up till this point. He's, for the most part, up until now, I haven't pictured him up until now because he's mostly been a background character and hasn't really been important to any sort of plot of the episode. So yeah, but just note. I haven't talked about him, but he has just been floating around in the for most of season 1. He's just been there. He's just been floating around. He hasn't really been involved in anything. He's made a couple of arrests on Sheriff Stone's behalf, but for the most part, he's just been floating around. He hasn't really contributed anything to the story up until now. So yeah, he's important in this episode. Remember him, but yeah, just know this isn't the first time we're seeing him. He's been around for a while, but. In case, Sheriff Stone is kind of sitting sulking because of the whole Dead Justice situation, and Deputy Bucky actually walks up to him and tries to console him, pointing out that he points out he does very much admire Sheriff Stone and all the hard work he does, and also points out that he's a shoo-in for the crimey as it's nicknamed, but and points out that he'll probably win it again for the 28th year in a row, But Sheriff Stone is admittedly still very peeved, pointing out that of course that obviously Dead Justice has been causing a lot of problems for him, and on top of that, it's his personal hero who's been doing all the arrests lately, so he isn't really feeling all that great. But in case to try and perk up his mood, Deputy Bucky then pulls out a flip book of him winning the award like he does every year, which but Sheriff Stone just kind of brushes him off and tells him to just bring him a cotton candy, and also remarks that he hopes that he'll just be able to get this over with so that he can go and see a movie. And Deputy Bucky fully understands and immediately leaves to go and get the cotton candy. At which point we then actually get to the award ceremony itself, where Mayor Jones then proceeds to walk up to the podium, thanks everybody for tuning out, and then proceeds to announce that this year's Crime Stopper of the Year award is going to go to someone who's been doing a lot of community work and actually has been helping to keep the Crystal Cove's law and order. And then proceeds to open the envelope, and it's revealed that Dead Justice actually won the award over Sheriff Stone, much to Sheriff Stone's chagrin. And it's at this point where Dead Justice actually shows up, and after shooting the prize in half, both of the Jones boys actually wind up catching it. Fred Sr. and Fred Jr. wind up catching half of the trophy, and it's at this point where Dead Justice reveals that he's actually not in it for any sort of award or anything else, and that remarks that he just wants to see justice be served, and also points out that that's more than he can say for their current sheriff, who he points out is not very good at his job, according to Dead Justice. And with that, he then proceeds to cackle wildly ride his horse in his head, which is I forget what it's specifically a reference to. It's a reference to the Hi-Ho Silver thing. I don't remember specifically what that's from, but yeah, he then announces Hi-Ho Silver, and then although his horse's name is Greg, which is actually kind of hilarious, but he then announces Hi-Ho Greg, and then rides off in the sunset and disappears in mist, and It's at this point where Sheriff Stone kind of begs Mayor Jones not to give Dead Justice the award, pointing out that he's not even alive, and that should kind of eliminate his eligibility a little bit. And to be fair, Sheriff Stone has a very good point about that, but Mayor Jones merely points out that he is doing a better job of Sheriff Stone, and also points out that the fact that him being arrested, the fact that he's dead hasn't really stopped him from giving the award to Sheriff Stone in the past, even though he admits that is in fact a joke at Sheriff Stone's expense, which causes Sheriff Stone to become a little bit depressed because Mayor Jones is just kind of making fun of him a little bit, but in case the kids then proceed to console him, pointing out that that's okay, that's too bad that he didn't win, and but also point out that they'll figure out who exactly it is that Justice is, and try to figure out how to actually stop him. But it's at this point where they also where Sheriff Stone kind of points out that there's really nothing that can be done, and that now that the best lawman in Crystal Cove has come back to town, that there's really nothing they can do. But then he notes that there's actually a lot of clamshells surrounding the area, and wonders where the hell they're all coming from, pointing out that this isn't somebody's personal dumpster bin, but it's at this point where they actually note a very interesting looking man that Sheriff Stone immediately identifies as a blogger named Night Ranger, and he's just a really cool dude. And I should mention, Night Ranger is just a really cool dude, but he's very 80s. I do like his design a lot, but in case when they ask him who he is, Sheriff Stone then points out that he is a blogger, and that he is indeed a blogger, and specifically, he is a blogger that doesn't like Sheriff Stone very much, and makes numerous comments about it on his blog. But and points out, which also causes the kids to become a little bit suspicious of Night Ranger, since obviously if somebody who's very critical of Sheriff Stone and kind of fits the bill of Night Ranger, kind of fits the bill of Dead Justice a little bit better, and realizing that they may have a suspect, they decide to actually, and also noting that he's a little bit weird, they decide to actually tail him out. They actually decide to actually tail him out of Crystal Cove, and proceed to follow him in his car, which again is again very 80s, and also the music that plays from the stereo in his car, again very 80s. And yeah, I also should mention, this is his theme song. This is Night Ranger's theme song that plays every single time he walks into a room. And I'm not kidding. That winds up becoming a joke later in the episode. But in any case, they decide to tail him, and it's at this point where Fred wonders what the deal with Night Ranger is, and wonders what kind of beef he actually has with Sheriff Stone. But then Velma rather scarily remarks that they could ask him himself, and sure enough, Dead Justice just kind of appears out of nowhere in the middle of the road, and demands that they stop actually investigating into the matters of Dead Justice, and specifically Night Ranger at the moment, and pointing out that he's the only lawman in town, and he's not going to let anybody else take over his turf. But when Fred kind of defies him, pointing out that, asking him what will happen if they don't. He then points out that he'll simply shoot to kill, and proceeds to leave. And now realizing that they need a little bit more information regarding Night Ranger, proceeds to point, and also Dead Justice. They decide that the best person to ask would actually be the sheriff. And sure enough, they go to his house where a very elderly woman stops them with a shotgun and asks them why they're there and who sent them. And they merely remark that they're there to actually see the sheriff, but when they proceed to remark that she proceeds to remark that he's a bed and asks them what they want, she merely the Mr. Ink then proceeds to point out that they just want to see the sheriff and ask him a couple of questions about Dead Justice, and she immediately lets them in, and also points out that, and also tells the sheriff that some friends are there to see him, and it's very common, and then it also reveals that she's actually his mother, which is kind of, and it also makes sense. he seems like the kind of guy who would still be living with his mom at such an old at his age, which it's very comical and funny, but it also makes sense with his character. But and while Sheriff Stone denies the fact that he wants to see them, and even points out that he doesn't want to see them, they merely point out that he literally just turned in, and is also very bent out of the shape over the fact that Judge Justice had kind of stole his Crimey Award, which he adamantly denies. But it's at this point where Velma actually winds up asking Sheriff Stone what he knows about Dead Justice, and anything and everything that they can learn about him as a person would actually help in solving the mystery. And it's at this point where Sheriff Stone pointing out that obviously he's a very big history buff and knows all about Dead Justice, then proceeds to tell them the story of Dead Justice. And what we find out is that many years ago, over a century ago, Crystal Cove didn't actually have a police department of any sort of kind, and law and criminals just kind of ran rampant in the streets. At which point, a man named Iron Will Willinson, who actually shows up in Crystal Cove, and decides that he's going to actually clean up the streets. He shows up. He decides that Crystal Cove needs to actually have some sort of law in place, and proceeds to actually round up all the criminals and arrest them, which he does single-handedly, might I add. He actually gets into a gunfight with at least 7 people, and he manages to disarm them all within a matter of seconds. Also very comically, to the point where his gun should be out of bullets, and it's not. He just keeps firing, and yeah, it's very fun, and it is very funny. But in case after arresting all the criminals in town, the ancient people of Crystal Cove decided to make him sheriff, and that's how he got the nickname Dead Justice. Because they gave him the nickname as soon as he became sheriff. But in case, even after becoming sheriff, it turns out there was actually one person that he was never able to catch, a man named Nitro Winsinski, who had a flair for the dramatic. I should mention, he robbed banks, but every time he did it, he blew it up. So it was very obvious when he was in the area and robbing banks, and of course after meeting Nitro Wazinski, Iron Will then decided to go off and chase him to the ends of the earth until he actually finally arrested him, which, as it turns out, is exactly what happened. He eventually during their final showdown, he chased Nitro into an active volcano, and while the two of them were killed in the process, because obviously they fell into an active volcano, he does wind up finally arresting Nitro Wazinski as the two of them are going in. So he does wind up finishing off beating Nitro Wazinski and wind up catching him, and the two of them obviously die, and of course Dead Justice was never heard from again. Although Shaggy then proceeds to add "until now," which causes Sheriff Stone to be obviously annoyed, but during the story, Velma does note a very interesting note about Iron Will Wilson. That according to Sheriff Stone, he was left-handed, which of course Sheriff Stone chalks up as the fact that that is something that every hardcore Dead Justice fan knows. But Velma then proceeds to point out an inconsistency with that, pointing out that the Dead Justice they saw on the road was wielding his gun in his right hand, which of course causes Sheriff Stone to immediately realize that that's a fake Dead Justice and that somebody is impersonating him. And it's at this point where Shaggy actually comes up with something interesting regarding the story, which is that which, as we find as it's revealed, the Night Ranger is right-handed. He actually shucks all of his clams that he eats with his right hand, which they note makes him a very prime suspect. And with that, they immediately decide to get into the mystery machine with of course Sheriff Stone calling shotgun, with much to Daphne's annoyance, because as she points out, that's her special place beside Fred, which is very cute. But in case they then proceed to get into the vehicle and proceed to drive into the sun and proceed to actually drive off to Night Ranger's house, and they decide to actually start snooping around and looking for clues. They actually find a chin-up bar at one point, which Shaggy walks into and it hits Scooby, and they both grumble about it a little bit, but they do eventually find some interesting things regarding Night Ranger, which is that he has an unusual amount of hay in his house, which is a very weird thing to be doing, and of course Sheriff Stone immediately contributes to the fact that horses eat hay, and since obviously Dead Justice has a horse, then that kind of seems to clinch the deal about the fact that he keeps hay in his house is a very obvious red flag. But in any case, it's at this point where Night Ranger actually comes home in his car, and they immediately hide behind the couch, and Night Ranger then proceeds to come in, and the first thing he does is whip his shirt off, revealing that he actually has hay covering his shirt, covering his shoulders, and also what we find out is what he actually uses the hay for, which is that apparently he uses it for boxing. He just punches the hay. He just uses the hay as a like kind of a, what is it? You know what I'm talking about? The big boxing thing. The boxing. I don't know what it's called, but the sandbag. That's what we're going with. It's the sandbag that he uses. He uses them for sandbags, which they do point out. It does kind of explain the hay, and it's at this point where he actually winds up wandering off into the other room, and concluding that is indeed what the hay is for. They then point out that it doesn't seem like he has anything suspicious about him, but although Sheriff Stone does indeed insist that he is indeed Dead Justice, but then they hear a voice insisting that he's not, and when they have finally poked their head out of the couch after arguing with the voice for a bit, they then discover that Dead Justice is actually in Night Ranger's house, and they do, and Shaggy does point out that the voice probably knows what it's talking about. But in cases at this point where Dead Justice pointing out that he would shoot, that he was going to follow through with his threats that he made last time. Points out that he is indeed going to shoot them dead now that they've continued to investigate his existence. And of course, also insists that tells Sheriff Stone to hand over his badge, because as he points out, he's the worst lawman on this side of heaven and hell, and which they actually refer to as Hades, because they can't say that on a kids show. But and also points out that since he's been there, that's saying a lot. Which Shaggy just points out is just excessively mean. But in case as Dead Justice is about to corner them, the side of the house suddenly gets ripped out of its foundation, and what we find out is that Night Ranger is actually attached a pulley from the back of his car to the roof of his house, and just pulled the wall down so that Mystery Inc. and Sheriff Stone can escape. And they do, although Dead Justice is barely able to keep up with them, and is barely able to hit them with his gun. But he just barely misses them, and they proceed to escape. At which point, Fred then proceeds to thank Night Ranger, pointing out that he saved them, and Night Ranger just gives them a silent thumbs up and drives off. And with Fred pointing out that he doesn't seem like the very talkative type, and of course Sheriff Stone insists that he probably saves everything he has to say for his blog, and does kind of hate how cool that makes him. So yeah, that's just kind of a funny thing. In addition to just being one of the coolest characters ever in the show, he just doesn't say anything. He just leaves. He just goes where he's needed. Blaring his theme music wherever he goes, and he leaves. To the point where he actually turned on a radio in his house to actually listen to his theme music while he's playing. And that's what I said. It was actually a recurring joke. He leaves his car and then goes into his house and starts continuing to play the music that he listens to. And it is the greatest thing ever. But in case Velma, it is at this point where Velma actually points out that Dead Justice seems to have disappeared and wonders where he went. At which point Mayor Jones is who Fred points out seems to point out is just inexplicably there. Then he walks up asking what's going on, and when Fred insists to know what his dad is doing there, Fred Sr. then proceeds to point out that he's actually there to talk to the sheriff, and then proceeds to tell him that he's fired. And more to the point, that effective immediately, Dead Justice is going to be taking over the sheriff department, which much to Sheriff Stone's chagrin, but when Fred Sr. actually winds up taking his badge, he then proceeds to explain that the reason he's doing it is because Dead Justice just works for free. That's literally the only reason. But in any case, as Sheriff Stone takes his badge off, he then proceeds to point out that regardless of whether or not he is actually sheriff, he will always be Sheriff Bronson Stone, because as it turns out, and this is rather humorous, his mom actually named him sheriff. His full name is actually Sheriff Bronson Stone. So his first name is actually Sheriff. And he enunciates Bronson Stone because he wants people to think that's his name, but in actuality, his full name is Sheriff Bronson Stone, and it's really funny. But and of course, when Shaggy then proceeds to point that out, he then remarks that his mom likes to plan ahead for the future, and that she's going to be very disappointed when she finds out that Sheriff Stone is no longer Sheriff Stone, and he then leaves to go cry. But at which point Daphne actually comes to Sheriff Stone's aid, pointing out that of course Sheriff Stone did nothing wrong, and that Dead Justice is actually the person responsible, but and it's actually the bad guy in this situation. But then they actually wind up hearing a cackling from the cliffs, and they actually hear Dead Justice appear on the cliffs, now finally satisfied that he's beaten Sheriff Stone, and of course that winds up sending goosebumps down Mayor Jones' spine, pointing out that they can't get that kind of showmanship from Sheriff Stone, so that's part of the reason why he's being fired as well. But in case, Sheriff Stone then proceeds to walk off, and also Mayor Jones then proceeds to walk off as well. And it's at this point where Fred insists that they now need to find a way to actually beat Dead Justice and figure out how to arrest him so that Sheriff Stone can get his job back, and that involves actually solving the mystery to figure out who Dead Justice is. So of course the first thing they do in the morning is immediately go to the sheriff's department, where we find out that Bucky is actually the one responsible for boxing up all of Sheriff Stone's old stuff, and they then proceed to ask him how he's handling everything, and he proceeds to point out that obviously he isn't very happy about the fact that they now have a new sheriff, and that he doesn't really want to get rid of all of Sheriff Stone's stuff, but he's no longer the sheriff, so they kind of have no choice. And when they ask him where he's actually working now, he then proceeds to point out, although he admits he isn't supposed to tell them any of this, that he's actually started working part-time at the clam cabin, which causes Shaggy and Scooby to perk up, pointing out that they were feeling a bit peckish, and obviously that's a perfect excuse for them to go to one of their favorite restaurants in Crystal Cove. So of course they're going to be very happy about the fact that Sheriff Stone works there now. But in case when they volunteer to actually take Sheriff Stone's stuff off of Bucky's hands, Bucky tells him to go ahead, pointing out that he doesn't really want to look at it, and starts actually sobbing very openly. Which and of course Mystery Inc. just decides that this is probably the best time to just kind of slink away and not really show off the fact, and just not really make it known that they're leaving. So they just kind of sneak off. But in case after leaving the department, they wonder if they can actually do anything to actually help Sheriff Stone, pointing out that obviously Night Ranger actually wound up being innocent, because he actually is indeed not Dead Justice. So they point out that they'll likely need a new suspect, and it's to the point where Velma actually starts going through Sheriff Stone's stuff and discovers some incriminating evidence that she thinks will actually be able to nail down who they think Dead Justice is, and insists that they get to the clam cabin immediately. At which point they actually arrive at the clam cabin and discover that Sheriff Stone has actually started wearing a bag over his head in shame, and isn't too happy about the fact that he's no longer sheriff. But when they ask to speak to Sheriff Stone, he merely points out that there's no one by the name of Sheriff Stone there, and that he's actually started going by the name of Bago, which is just a pun on the fact that he's wearing a bag over his head, and is also a quote-unquote disguise in the show. But in case that he then proceeds to perk up when the kids find out that they actually have evidence that could actually enable him to finally incriminate Dead Justice and bring him down, which Sheriff Stone is more than happy to hear, and immediately whips on his sheriff's hat and his badge, which apparently he has. It seems like an inconsistency, but apparently he has like a fake badge or something. But which yeah, you shouldn't incriminate a law person. I should mention that. But in case when he insists how they are actually going to catch Dead Justice, they then proceed to point out that they do have something that they could actually very easily use to stop Dead Justice, and it involves setting a trap. And Sheriff Stone then gives him a bit of a quizzical expression, but he does proceed to start listening. And what we find out is that they actually have a very interesting idea for a trap. And so what they do is that there's actually a large explosion at the bank, which immediately causes Dead Justice to investigate, and he immediately goes to go investigate who's robbing the bank, and then insists that that nobody robs a bank in his town. But then we find out that what happened was it was actually Nitro Wazinski, or rather the ghost of Nitro Wazinski. It looks exactly like him, so I'm not going to picture him again. But what we find out is that if this actually causes Dead Justice to become spooked, because obviously Nitro Wazinski is supposed to be dead. But then Nitro insists that so is Dead Justice, and then proceeds to kind of chase after Dead Justice, who freaks out because obviously Nitro is supposed to be dead and he has no idea why Nitro is there, which is very inconsistent considering this was his nemesis back in the day, and that does wind up playing into the whole this is a fake Dead Justice thing. But in any case, Nitro also throughout all of this, Nitro then taunts him a little bit, wondering if he's actually seen a ghost, and eventually they wind up wandering into, and eventually Dead Justice winds up falling off his horse, at which point the Nitro Wazinski that we've actually been seeing, or rather the ghost, is actually Sheriff Stone in a disguise, and Shaggy and Scooby are also apparently his horse, which doesn't make sense. And Mr. Ink then proceeds to insist that he is actually surrounded, and there's nowhere for him to go. And at which point, but of course, Dead Justice, determined until the very end, points out that that's what they think, and then he proceeds to run off. But it's at this point where Fred actually sets up another pulley trap, which doesn't work right away because, once again, his pulley traps, they're established in this episode to not work consistently, but he does eventually get to work, and he winds up trapping Dead Justice in a cage. And it's at this point where they actually go to approach Dead Justice to unmask him, and it's revealed that Dead Justice is actually Deputy Bucky, which causes Sheriff Stone to become very confused, pointing out that Deputy Bucky was actually like a father to him, even though Deputy Bucky later admits that Sheriff Stone is actually 20 years older than him, even though Sheriff Stone denies the fact that that's true, and then proceeds to wonder why Deputy Bucky did it, and at which point Velma actually winds up cluing him in, revealing that what she actually found in Sheriff Stone's old stuff is actually Bucky's various failed promotion tests, and a lot of them. And what we find out is that in addition to actually being passed up for a promotion multiple times, since obviously he's not the strongest test taker. What we find out is that actually several of the doodles that he wrote that he actually wrote in his notebook is actually things that are references to the Dead Justice costume, and specifically his demon bullets, which I should mention look a little bit like bullet bills. I haven't really commented on that, but they look a little bit like bullet bills. But in any case, they then realize that then also points out that Deputy Bucky actually has a very obvious motive for why he will want Sheriff Stone out of the police department. Obviously, Sheriff Stone is one of the greatest lawmen they've ever had, even though he doesn't really solve a lot of the crimes as admitted in the episode. But Deputy Bucky, kind of bitter about the fact that he keeps getting passed over for a promotion, that decided to actually dress up as Dead Justice to both demoralize Sheriff Stone and also make him look incompetent at his job, which fair, but of course Sheriff Stone points out that obviously he now owes Mr. Ink one, since they finally pointed out that Deputy Bucky was trying to make him look bad, but he also denies that he ever actually owes them one, and also when Fred tries to put his hand on his shoulder, he shakes him off, which is very funny. But in any case, with that, Fred Sr. then proceeds to kind of rectify his mistake and gives Sheriff Stone the Crimey Award that he was supposed to get toward the beginning of the episode, with Sheriff Stone thanking Mayor Jones for finally giving him his Crimey, and also thanks him for the raise, even though Mayor Jones insists that he didn't really give the Sheriff Stone a raise at all, and also points out that previously his job worked for free, so he doesn't really know what he's talking about with a raise. But in any case, Fred then proceeds to thank his dad for for kind of helping recognize Sheriff Stone as the official crime man of Crystal Cove that he is, and but it also points out that it hadn't been for the Mailing kids, that Judge Justice would still be running rampant in the streets. But yeah, but in any case, but Fred Sr. then just proceeds to actually kind of blow off his son, pointing out that he actually doesn't really have time to actually talk to him about that kind of stuff, and that he actually has work he needs to do. Even though Fred Jr. insists that his dad is going the wrong way to go to work and is clearly just trying to avoid him. And it's at this point where Daphne winds up consoling him, pointing out that she knows how hard Fred is actually trying to connect with his dad. At which point then they proceed to go to the clam cabin on a date, which Fred pointing out that it also always feels like that regardless of what's going on, he points out that he always feels like that Daphne is the only one ever really by his side, because he keeps constantly losing people, and also people just kind of keep ignoring him. But she insists that that's not where he'll always be, at his side, riding shotgun with her fella. At which point Fred points out that he actually does appreciate that, but also then proceeds to point out that he would like her to continue riding shotgun with him forever. At which point he then picks up an onion ring and proceeds to put it on her finger and kind of asks her to marry him, and they kind of become engaged, which is very cute. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a spur of the moment thing, because obviously Fred needed an onion ring for that to work, and Daphne isn't entirely sure if she's flushed at the fact that Fred just asked her to marry him, her to marry him, or if it's her allergies, her seafood allergies, which are flaring up. But he does point out that she looks fine from where he's standing, and asks her what her answer is. And of course, she immediately says yes. In her own words, he trapped her at hello, and they two proceed to share a kiss, which apparently on the wiki is the first time the two characters have actually canonically kissed in the animated series up until this point. Prior to that, never in the live action series. A couple of times, so this is a couple of times, but this is the first time they've actually kissed in the cartoon, which is very cute. But in any case, as they share a kiss and also try and finalize their engagement, pointing out that they'll have to wait until at least graduation. They do Night Ranger, in his final appearance of the episode, that is real to have been watching the whole date, and then proceeds to kind of do a little bit of a breakdance while he's watching. So yeah, once again, Night Ranger, just the coolest character in this whole show, and the fact that he's only in the one episode, or at least that I know of, is kind of criminal. But in any case, yeah, this episode just kind of, as I said, clarifies a couple of things regarding how Crystal Cove was actually founded, which I do kind of like, and it does kind of explain some things about how their law enforcement, about the history of Crystal Cove's law enforcement. Apparently, they didn't have a sheriff at first, and then Iron Will Willinson showed up and founded the station himself personally, and there's just been a sheriff department consistently for the past century. So yeah, but also more importantly, Daphne and Fred are engaged, and that's very cute. And I am curious where that's going to go. Obviously, there's only one way it could go, because obviously they are engaged. They are eventually going to get married, and I am very proud of them, because that is indeed a thing that's happened. But yeah, I am interested to see where that's going to go. But for right now, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.